sirens wailed through the French dawn. A stretcher rolled under the flashing red lights, its wheels clattering on wet concrete. When Oberleutnant Karl Weiss opened his eyes, he expected a prison camp, a tribunal, perhaps the dull metallic taste of morphine before interrogation. Instead, he saw a white ceiling, smelled antiseptic, and noticed a flag, white stars against deep blue, fluttering on the far wall. Not the Black Cross of the Reich, the flag of the enemy. He tried to move, but pain flooded his legs. One of them was wrapped in thick gauze from hip to ankle, the other pierced by tubes dripping clear fluid. A nurse leaned over him. Her uniform was clean, her hair tucked neatly beneath her cap. "Is this punishment?" he whispered through cracked lips. She paused, looked at him, and said softly, "No, it's morning." That line, recorded in the diary of U.S. Army nurse Helen Morris at Valley Forge Hospital, 1944, became a symbol of the impossible. A man who had once flown above Allied cities, dropping bombs, was now saved by the hands of those who had once run for cover beneath them. The contradiction was unbearable and miraculous at once. For the German pilot, the pain in his legs was real, but the greater pain was realizing that mercy could come from the direction of hatred. For the Americans, the act of saving him was both duty and defiance. This wasn't just medicine, it was moral resistance to the logic of war itself. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? As dawn broke over the hospital, Karl stared at the stars on the flag until his eyes blurred. Outside, trucks carried other wounded, Americans, Germans, nameless bodies from the same fire. Somewhere, a nurse hummed a hymn, her voice mixing with the smell of alcohol and the faint rustle of sheets. War had taught both sides to kill. That morning, medicine began to teach them to see. The hands that trembled on both sides told a truth deeper than any uniform. In Camp Forest, Tennessee, where the U.S. Army had converted barracks into makeshift recovery wards, American nurses and German pilots shared the same air, heavy with disinfectant and grief. Some of these nurses had brothers buried in Europe. They carried invisible wounds while tending to visible ones. When they reached for a bandage or syringe, their fingers sometimes shook, not from fatigue, but from memory. One nurse later confessed in the American Nurses Oral History Project, 1946, "I heard his German accent and thought of my brother's last letter from France. But when he moaned in pain, I saw only a human being. Those small tremors were a quiet rebellion against vengeance. For every wound stitched, another invisible thread bound two enemies together in reluctant compassion." The nurses did not speak German, yet their touch translated what words could not. To the injured pilots, some barely 20, the feel of clean sheets, the sound of English lullabies drifting from the next cot, seemed unreal. They had been told Americans were mechanical, heartless, worshippers of industry. But these women moved gently, whispering "easy now," as they changed dressings, their hands shaking slightly each time the patient gasped. Karl Weiss watched Nurse Morris clean his leg wound. Beneath the thin gloves, he saw her knuckles whiten, her breath unsteady. "You're afraid," he said, trying to provoke her. She met his gaze, then replied, "Yes, but not of you." The words stayed with him. For the first time since the cockpit fireball over Normandy, he felt shame stronger than pain. At night, when the nurses finally sat down, some of them wept quietly. The war had stolen their brothers and sent them enemies to care for instead. Yet in those moments, the trembling of hands became a fragile bridge. Neither side wanted to admit it, but both were healing the same wound, the one that had split the world in two. Outside, the wind rattled the tin roofs of the camp hospital, carrying the echoes of distant gunfire from Europe. Inside, trembling hands tied clean gauze around ruined legs, and for a few seconds, the war paused. Not in the maps or headlines, but in the silence between two heartbeats. There were days when medicine ran out before mercy did. At Camp Shanks Medical Annex in 1945, supplies were stretched to the limit. Morphine was rationed, penicillin precious, and plasma delayed by storms over the Atlantic. In one narrow operating tent lit by a single hanging bulb, American doctors faced an impossible decision: whether to attempt a vascular repair on a Luftwaffe pilot whose legs were shredded by shrapnel, or amputate to save his life. The patient was awake. His name was Lieutenant Dieter Lang, 24, once a flight instructor near Bremen. He had lost so much blood that the anesthetic wouldn't take. "Hold him," a medic said quietly. The nurse pressed down on his shoulders as the surgeon made the first incision, the tent filled with the smell of iron and iodine. Lang screamed, "Mutter, not Heil Hitler." The word cut deeper than the scalpel. It wasn't ideology crying out, but instinct. A son calling for his mother in the language of pain. Someone outside turned up the generator to drown the sound, but it carried through the canvas walls. Helen Morris stood nearby, passing instruments, her lips trembling. In her later notes, she wrote, "He screamed until he couldn't anymore, and then he whispered, 'Don't stop. I want to walk again.'" They didn't stop. The operation lasted 2 hours. No morphine, no anesthesia, just the sound of metal tools clinking against trays and the soft, rhythmic voice of a nurse saying, "You're going to live." When it ended, Lang lay drenched in sweat, eyes unfocused. He grabbed her wrist and whispered, "You hurt me to save me." Those words rippled through the ward. The staff repeated them quietly, not as praise, but as confession. In that field hospital, pain was no longer punishment. It was the price of redemption. For the German patients, the agony blurred the line between victim and enemy. For the Americans, the act of cutting to heal tested everything they had been taught about justice. When Lang finally fell asleep, the nurse removed her blood-stained gloves and stared at her hands, trembling again. But not from fear this time. Outside, the sun rose over the barbed wire fence, and the guards saluted the flag. Inside, a wounded man dreamed of walking on soil that no longer belonged to conquerors. In the long corridor of the recovery ward at Fort Devens, Massachusetts, sunlight spilled across the white tile floor, bouncing off metal crutches and wheelchairs. Here, war's aftermath smelled of alcohol and chalk dust. Nurse Eleanor Price from Ohio carried a habit that made her famous among the German prisoners. She decorated every bandage she changed. Sometimes she drew a flower, sometimes a star, and once, for a wounded Luftwaffe pilot named Hans Keller, she drew 2 small wings just above the sutures on his calf. He stared at them in silence. Keller had been a squadron leader, shot down over Cherbourg, his Messerschmitt torn apart midair. For months, he hadn't seen his reflection, hadn't believed he'd ever stand again. That morning, when he saw those tiny wings inked on the white gauze, something cracked open inside him. He whispered, "You gave me back what I lost." She smiled, unsure he would even understand her words when she answered, "Then keep them. They're yours now." The photo of that moment, real and unposed, appeared in Stars and Stripes on January 3rd, 1945, under the caption, "Nurse decorates bandage of enemy pilot." It was reprinted in Europe months later, a fleeting image of humanity amid ruins. Soldiers on both sides saw it. Some cursed it as propaganda, others kept it folded in their pockets. But those who had seen too much blood recognized its power. Mercy could be more dangerous than bullets, because it dismantled hate silently. Keller began to walk again weeks later, each limp a reminder of the wings he once wore proudly on his uniform. The ones on his bandage were childish, uneven, drawn with pencil and care. But in the sterile silence of that ward, they became a miracle of scale. Proof that dignity could return in the smallest gesture. Eleanor never forgot him. Years after the war, she wrote in a letter to a fellow nurse, "I think I drew those wings for myself too. We all needed to believe something broken could still fly." Outside the hospital, snow was falling softly over the American flag at half-mast. Inside, a man who once bombed London took his first step, guided not by pride or orders, but by 2 fragile lines on a strip of white cloth. By spring 1945, compassion had become controversial. Newspapers across the United States began printing reports that captured German pilots were receiving equal medical care in American hospitals. The phrase ignited anger among families who had lost sons in Anzio, Bastogne, and the skies over the Ardennes. Letters poured into Congress, demanding to know why enemy murderers were walking again while American amputees still waited for prosthetics. The War Department convened meetings to address it, torn between 2 truths. America's moral strength lay in mercy, but mercy, shown too openly, could look like betrayal. At Camp Forest, officials debated whether photographs of POW recoveries should be released at all. A major in the Public Information Office argued, "This is not charity, it's strategy. They will go home knowing what we stand for." A nurse in the corner replied quietly, And what do we stand for if we stop saving them? That line never made it to the minutes, but it lived on in the memories of those present. Meanwhile, the German patients sensed the tension. Some tried to hide their gratitude, afraid it might humiliate them before their comrades. Others wrote secret thank you notes that the censors intercepted, unsure if kindness counted as intelligence risk. In one confiscated letter, a pilot named Klaus Ehrhardt wrote, "If this is America, then I was lied to my entire life." The newspapers didn't print that one either, but word spread through camp corridors that American nurses had refused orders to prioritize by nationality when morphine ran low. For them, the Hippocratic Oath mattered more than the uniform on the gurney. The field doctor, Captain Aaron Bloom, recorded in his journal, "Every life we save weakens the propaganda that feeds the next war." Still, the debate grew louder. Radio hosts in New York called it pampering the enemy. Veterans' wives in Oklahoma sent telegrams demanding stricter policies. One journalist visiting the hospital described the surreal sight. 2 crutches clacking, one with an American insignia, one with a Luftwaffe eagle, moving in rhythm down the same hallway. And so the moral question lingers even now. When an enemy falls, is healing him an act of strength or surrender? What would you have done? Summer 1945. The war was ending, but recovery had only begun. At Fort Sam Houston in Texas, the rehabilitation wing echoed with the uneven rhythm of wooden crutches and metal braces striking the floor. The ward was shared, no separation now between uniforms. On one side, young American airmen who had survived flak bursts over Berlin. On the other, the same German pilots who had fired those guns. The doctors insisted they train together, balance together, walk together. To everyone's surprise, it worked. One photograph from that summer captured it all. 2 men side by side, both missing a leg, both leaning on crutches, one wearing an eagle patch, the other a star. The caption read simply, "They walk again." A military surgeon, Dr. Bloom, wrote beneath the image, "They no longer salute flags, they salute balance." Carl Weiss was among them. After months of surgeries, his nerves still twitched like living wire. His American therapist, Sergeant Tom Bowers, pushed him harder each day. "You fall, you stand. Same rule for everyone," he'd say. At first, Carl resented it, the blunt orders, the push toward equality. But then he saw Bowers remove his own prosthetic leg after training. The American had lost it in Italy. The silence that followed was heavier than words. 2 men, once enemies, now rebuilt by the same country's metal and willpower. Outside, carpenters from local factories volunteered to build wooden braces and foot molds. Over 1,200 German POWs received mobility treatment in the US. By the end of that year, 83% regained full or partial use of their legs. These statistics read like logistics, but behind each number was a heartbeat, trying to stand again. In group sessions, they practiced walking across a painted line on the floor. One nurse described it in a letter. They looked like children learning to walk, except they carried the weight of whole nations on their shoulders. There were no speeches, no applause, just the sound of crutches scraping and quiet breathing. When Carl finally took 3 steps unaided, the ward fell silent. He turned to the others and whispered, "Now I can go home, and not as the man who fell." But none of them truly went home the same. They carried something invisible, something that didn't limp. The knowledge that mercy, once seen, could never be unseen. Tell me, if you had stood there in that hallway, would you have felt pride or shame? The transport ship Marine Jumper left New York Harbor in March 1946, carrying hundreds of repatriated German POWs home to a country in ruins. Among them limped Karl Weiss, Dieter Lang, and Hans Keller, the 3 men whose lives had been tied together by the steady hands of American nurses. Their new legs, one written in trembling hands, blood-stained gloves, and letters that crossed oceans. The story of the wounded German pilots who survived because American nurses refused to see enemies is one of those forgotten chapters where humanity slipped through the cracks of ideology. It does not glorify one side. Dresden flattened, Bremen gutted, Munich silent under snow. In the ruins, these once proud aviators discovered a strange new burden. They had been treated better in captivity than their neighbors were now living. Weiss found his family's apartment burned to its foundations. Keller's squadron headquarters was a hospital for orphans. Lang, the man who had screamed "mutter" during surgery, now volunteered at a clinic run by the Red Cross. The same hands that had once dropped bombs now handed out milk and penicillin. Some of them wrote letters to the nurses who had saved them, though few were ever sent. One that did make its way across the Atlantic arrived in the mailbox of Helen Morris in 1947. The handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged by travel and tears. It read simply, "Every step I take reminds me that mercy is stronger than hate." She kept it folded in her Bible until she died. When historians later traced these correspondences, they found a pattern that defied the simplicity of victors and vanquished. Many former Luftwaffe prisoners, especially those treated in the United States, joined post-war reconciliation programs, teaching English to German children or volunteering for hospital reconstruction. They spoke not of surrender, but of transformation. One recalled, "The Americans saved our legs, but they also cut away the gangrene in our minds." In a photograph taken at Munich's Red Cross rehabilitation ball, and or absolve the other. It simply shows what happens when compassion defies the script of hatred. For Karl Weiss, Dieter Lang, Hans Keller, and thousands like them, survival became more than physical. Each scar was a border crossed, each step a contradiction made real. They arrived in America as symbols of a regime built on cruelty, and left as men haunted and humbled by mercy. The nurses, too, bore their invisible scars. They had tended to the faces of those who might have killed their own brothers, yet chose not to turn away. Their courage was not loud. It came in the quiet discipline of cleaning wounds, adjusting braces, and writing charts when the heart wanted to harden. In the decades that followed, the world rebuilt itself with prosthetics and promises, but the moral lesson of those hospital wards outlived both. The act of healing one's enemy became the most subversive weapon of all. It dismantled pride where propaganda had failed, reminding all who witnessed it that the true victory of war is not in conquest, but in conscience. An old nurse once said in an interview long after the war, "We saved their legs, but we saved our souls, too." Perhaps that is how history heals, slowly, imperfectly, limping forward on the legs that mercy rebuilt. Stitched, wired, or carved from maple, clattered softly against the ship's deck. Some still smelled faintly of the American hospitals they'd left behind. Iodine, soap, and bandage glue. As the Statue of Liberty receded behind them, many of the prisoners stood silently at the rail, unsure whether to salute or look away. Germany, when they reached it, was a landscape of ash and hunger. 1947, a man with a wooden leg dances with a nurse in a borrowed uniform. His name, Otto Weiss, Karl's cousin. The caption beneath it reads, "This leg was made by my enemies, but it carries me toward peace." Under the chandeliers, amid the slow turn of post-war waltzes, the sound of his prosthetic tapping against the floor seemed to mark a new rhythm for Europe. One built not on marching boots, but on second chances. History remembers wars by their victories and losses, by the steel of machines and the signatures on treaties. But beneath those grand lines lies a quieter archive.